All right. Welcome once again to the Exit Your Way Faces of Business. With me today, I have Susan Ganz. So, Susan, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Damon. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. You have a very interesting work that you do, and I think it's going to be fun learning more about that and your background. So, I'm happy to have you. So great we can do it today.
Thanks again for the opportunity.
Awesome, awesome. So, Susan, when we look at your background, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and kind of your career? Because it's interesting that you're helping executive teams and leaders get more of the right things done. And you started off with a BS in clinical psychology.
Yeah, so Damon, thank you so much for asking. I always say that I operate at the intersection of business and human behavior.
Yeah,
So, how I got to my work is that backstory of having that psychology background. And where does that come in? It comes in every day
yeah,
because it involves a lot of listening. So you might have heard the saying, right? We have two ears and one mouth in that proportion for a reason.
mm-hmm,
And that's where I really honed the active listening skills. It started with that psychology journey. And I've always been curious about what motivates people to be at their best, do their best. And I think that curiosity also carries through in business problem solving and working with teams. So my first job out of college was doing commercial lending for middle market companies. And I learned very early on how lonely at the top it is for CEOs and CFOs. Because as we were discussing their business, it wasn't just about their financing needs, it was about broader business questions. And so that really inspired me to go get my MBA in business, in finance and strategic management,
yeah,
so that I could career change to consulting
yeah,
and to be able to solve those larger problems. And so
nice.
then I went on to do consulting from the standpoint of corporate finance, so sold companies and did strategy consulting, so help with growth strategies and marketing strategies, and then decided to settle down, if you will, with one company to be able to impact strategy over time, and worked on Wall Street for 10 years doing technology management. And that really um, gave me my experience in change management. And
Yeah,
because in the technology management areas that I was hired for, it was really about introducing change and people embracing new ways of doing things, new strategies. And I had to understand that the very nature of human beings is to reject anything that's going to throw
yes,
things off balance, so to speak.
yes,
It's people want to be comfortable, and we are wired, our brains are wired to keep us safe and small. So when you say, oh, I'm going to introduce this new technology process, they're like, what? And so you have to bring them along with you on the journey and make it fun. And I've always made my projects fun. I've always involved people in the process, because that's the key, is involving them from the beginning and giving them a voice. And so I did that for 10 years, and then went into financial planning and advisory work. And it's also a challenge, because you're getting people to change behavior, to try new habits relative to
mm-hmm,
their money, new ways of thinking. Same sort of thing. There's that natural resistance
yeah,
to change.
yeah. That's for sure. Well, for our listeners here on LinkedIn or Facebook, if you can, it'd be kind of interesting just for you to shout out, drop a comment from where you're listening from. That'd be cool to see. And as we go along, we might post some of those up on the screen while we're doing it. And you're exactly right, Susan. I think that while when you're doing change and technology change specifically, people are often very resistant to it, and technology, as we all know, changes so quickly that it can be pretty radical changes that you're trying to introduce as well.
Absolutely. And it's always about taking somebody's temperature, right, for change, and really getting at naming the fear. I think that's the biggest thing is, okay, what is it that makes you uncomfortable about this change, or what is it that we can make this change more palatable? Like, what would help you? And I think when you involve people, it's all about involving people in the process. And that's what I found is the biggest takeaways in my journey with change management is about involving people in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to liken it to the fact that if you're going to be a change agent in a business, is when I was leading businesses, is you are constantly selling, but you're selling what your changes are to everyone that will listen, everyone you can talk to, and like you said, involving asking questions and just and helping them resolve their concerns
Yes.
and it is a form of selling almost, and I might not be using the right term, but it is you're explaining what's going to happen to allow people to become more comfortable.
Yes. And it's getting people to be comfortable with the discomfort, if that makes
Yes.
any sense. And I think people have been tested, for example, in this pandemic, right, to be uncomfortable and being comfortable with that uncomfortableness, the uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
around what's happening during these challenging and changing times.
Yes. Yes, that's for sure. So after you were doing the IT, you said you went into financial management or financial, yes, financial management, helping people planning their finances and stuff. So what did you find most challenging about that?
So to me, the biggest challenge goes back to change, right? When you're, people say, "Oh, I would like support for, planning my future," and we'd get to the nuts and bolts of, hey, what is it that's important to you? Your big why, and liking it to your values. But when the rubber meets the road is taking that action, right?
Yes.
Taking that first action and making things in bite-sized chunks so that it becomes palatable. Because when you present a whole plan, people become overwhelmed. Like, oh, I can't do that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
expect you to do that. So I would always do a checklist. Like, here, here are some things you can do. Let's tackle this one step at a time. And after you
Mm-hmm.
do one thing, we can work on the next thing. But it's that initial hesitation to get over the initial inertia. Because again,
Yeah.
the brain is keeping us small. Can't do that. Can't do that. Have to protect you. Even though these things, these actions that we were describing are all in the best interest of the client.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm writing a couple of notes down here because I want to ask some follow-ups on that. It is, and you're exactly right. So this is kind of off subject a little bit, but so do you think that we can actually over time train our brain to not be resistant to change?
I think we can change our brains, rewire our brains to be open to new things and get it comfortable with the discomfort. I think
Okay.
we can. Like, there'll always be times where the brain's going to say, "Oh no, oh no, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to protect you." But I think it's that signal. Say, wait a second, I'm going to be growing. So, by doing this change. So it's changing the messaging, changing, as some people say, the movies in
Okay.
our head.
Yeah.
And we can change up the energy. I was listening to something today, and somebody said, "Oh, I've changed how I think about attention deficit disorder." They said
Hmm.
something about I have attention expansion disorder, something like that. But just changing the wording of how we look at things, the perspective, we can rewire our brains.
Yeah. That's a great. So we're changing our perspective and the wording in our mind. Yeah, that's really good, because I know a lot of people listening and a lot of people in general, and you coach executives behind the scenes. There's a lot of strife that goes on with,
Yes.
even at the highest levels, imposter syndrome, and just all kinds of internal that they fight with every single day that prevents them from being, as good as they could be. And that's why I think that it's interesting when it to understand the brain a little bit more and what we can actually do if we work at it.
Yes, and it's intention. It's all about our intention
Tension.
and what we give attention to, our intentions and the attention. And
Yes.
it goes back to, I always say, is foundational is to know your why, to really get clear about why you're doing what you're doing, because that keeps you grounded. Because when things get hard, you'll want to retreat. But if you know your why, you tend not to, oh, I remember the reason why I'm doing this. And yes, it's going to be hard. When I power through this, I know I could get to the other side and accomplish this goal. That's very important to me.
Yes. Yes. So as you progress from the financial planning world, you then decided that you were going to help. You were going to be a C-suite advisor, and it says you're C-suite advisor, business strategist slash chief of staff. So what kind? First of all, how did you kind of go? This is what I think I should be doing. Where was it? Where was the light bulb when the light bulb came on?
So the light bulb came on about 3+ years ago, as there were some changes in the financial services industry in which my particular voice and brand couldn't be fully heard. Let's just say, due to some legislative changes and how the my particular company I was working for interpreted those rules. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to think about, well, where is it that I want to play? What is my why? What are the things that I like to do? And for me, it always comes down to, I love strategy. I love change management. I love project management. I love coaching, business doctor, business therapist. Um, I love making an impact. And for me, that's one of my core values, is about making an impact. And so I saw a broader opportunity beyond financial planning to be able to do that. And so I formally launched right before the pandemic last year as this chief of staff business strategist. And so you might be asking, well, what does that mean? What do you do in that role? And it's really about focusing the business owner or the entrepreneur on their key priorities and keep them on track, reminding them what's your why, what's important to you. Okay. And what are the activities that you're doing to support that? Because often there's a disconnect, and that's why they
Yes.
need a right hand person to be able to keep them focused on what they're good at and what they want to do with the business. And then be able to hand it off to this right hand person to help get some of the drive the strategic initiatives that they're not getting to, or also take care of some of their operational issues that maybe they shouldn't be pulled into, or to present data to them so that they can make decisions. And free up their time. It's really about freeing up time. Time is such a precious commodity that we can't get back. So it's
Yes.
about focusing the C-suite on what are the key things they need to get done, really want to get done with their business, and be mindful of bright shining objects getting in the way, being mindful of operational issues that might be best handled by some other people, or to, like I said, put it in a form where they can make decisions on it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think I think a lot of people, and it doesn't really matter the business. There's you can have a fairly sizable business and the owner is still more comfortable. Say I'm a electrician and I'm more comfortable being with the people in the field doing electrical work where their business is large enough they should be worrying about finance or something else or long-term sales or all these kind of things. But
Yes.
they got into business because they liked being an electrician. They knew they could do something different and make money, more money or whatever with having their own business. But yet their businesses suffer because they want to be there with, in the wrong place essentially at that time.
And I think that's something that a business owner needs to decide to do. Is it what drives them? Is it the work itself, or is it running the business? Because they're two different things.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And sometimes, yes, you could get involved in the work, but is that the main thing you want to be doing, or is it also being a leader and setting the tone and the culture for the company, being the face of the company, going out talking to clients, perhaps identifying new markets, new products, new services to be offering. And so it's getting really clear with yourself what is really important to you. And I think that's the hard work, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So are there, when you're working with these people, are there common themes that you see across the board? Do you go, this is really something that if a business school or whatever people worked more on, it would help them?
So it's funny you say that because I do a talk called the Quick MBA, and there are 3 lessons that I share in that talk. So the first lesson, and these are all things I didn't learn in business school.
Yeah, that's good.
So the first lesson is really about self-care. So it's getting clear on the why, and then also being mindful of your self-care when it comes to your personal life, when it comes to your financial life, and then when it comes to your profession, your career. And it's really about being mindful and embracing that you're not only a CEO of a company, you're also CEO of your life.
Yeah.
And to me, that was a big lesson I've learned the hard way. I also have observed other people getting burned out in their careers, and really I have embraced doing my own morning routines to get grounded for the day so I could be present for all the different people in my life. So not only clients and so forth, but my family members too.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the financial end, it's also making sure you have a solid foundation from which to work, getting your savings in order and your documents in order, and then having a plan for, what it is, how you want to approach your business from a financing standpoint. How do you want to fund other goals in your life?
Mm-hmm.
Like, home or college for your kid or charities or whatever is important to you. So it's getting that grounded. And then it's your profession, what is it that you want to achieve? And who is it that you intentionally want to develop relationships with? Because no matter what the business, you're always developing relationships with clients, with centers of influence, with vendors, with peers, industry experts. So
yeah, and it's interesting that number one is self-care, and you talk about the 3 areas you did. I'm going to be honest here. And when I was managing businesses in the 90s and late 90s, at least in the early 2000s, being a CEO oftentimes meant you were going to be divorced. It was just a matter of time. And that obviously is not the way it has to be, but in certain circles, that's the way it is. And it's not because that person is any worse than anyone else. It's because they don't understand how to do these things. And the more I've looked back at this, I think it's almost like today, if you look at a major league baseball player, football player, the leagues bring financial planners in with them because they've seen the horrors that happened before of, I get a $20 million signing bonus and I have nothing when I'm done playing. Business people don't have that luxury. It doesn't seem, other than someone like yourself that comes in and helps them. And I think it's just as important in ensuring that they have a good long-term life alongside of their career.
Absolutely. And I think it's about recognizing that one has different roles in their lives, right? They're a son or a daughter, right? We come from somewhere, so we're definitely a son or a daughter.
Yeah.
Right? You could be a brother or a sister. You could be a father or a mother. You could be a spouse. You could be a coworker. You could be a cheerleader or a community person. There's so many different roles that we play in our lives. And so I think it's also recognizing that you're not defined by your work alone. It's all these other things in your life. So I think that's one. Another thing you talked about divorce and challenges as a CEO. I very vividly remember at the beginning of business school, there was an article that came out in Business Week profiling these CEOs, and they give you the highlight reel, all these wonderful things and how life is beautiful and everything's perfect. And I was sitting having a conversation with my colleagues, and we stopped our studies and we had this conversation about this article and said, wouldn't it be great to really understand what were the sacrifices, what were the decisions that these CEOs made along the way? Was there something that they had to give up? Is there an and? Is it an or? What is it? Because we're not, it just seemed like it was just this perfect step ladder. And we know in life, it's not like that. It's really
not like that at all. Exactly.
And so we wrote a letter to the editor, which they published, to say in future articles, we would love to hear what's the backstory of these CEOs that you're profiling. What are some of the challenges that they've faced, real life challenges that they've faced in climbing the corporate ladder? And is there something that we should be mindful of? So I don't remember that they actually did the profiling of that future, but we said our piece.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think if you've read the Steve Jobs book, and it may be a good example, maybe a bad example, I don't know. But as brilliant as he was in Apple and the other things that he did, personally, there were challenges. There were definitely challenges in the life there, like everyone. Now everyone's got challenges, but I think that what you're doing by identifying, help people identify that and those different roles and help them work through them on their way to in their professional lives as well, is very valuable, because I also believe it is possible to have a decent personal life and a very vibrant career and all around, if they are cognizant of the things that you're helping them with.
Yes. And I think it all goes back to, I'm going to point back to the why. Like Simon Sinek says, it starts with why and knowing your purpose, because that's the thread throughout. So when I'm working with companies and they say, oh, I want to pursue XYZ strategy or XYZ tactic, we go back to, wait, before you jump to all the fun stuff, there's just a little bit of other fun stuff we need to talk about. And that's like, what's the bigger picture here? Why you're doing what you're doing? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Like why? And it's not always an easy question for people to answer. And I think that's why they avoid it.
Yeah. Yeah,
It goes back to that comfort, discomfort thing again.
yes. Yes. So in your quick MBA, we talked about the first one was self-care. So what's your number two?
So number two is about developing relationships and why relationship building is important and being mindful of things like emotional intelligence. So how you manage your own emotions and you're being self-aware, and then how you manage relationships and being aware of, others and their emotions, and then being intentional about the people that you want to develop relationships with, and making a simple grid, if you will, of who are the types of people I want to meet for my business, and how often do I want to reach out, have a touch point with them, and what does that touch point look like? Is that a virtual coffee? Is that touch point an email? Is it a text? Is it a phone call? What is it?
Yeah.
And so it's intentional about how that outreach happens, and it's also being mindful of people's human needs. What I find during the pandemic is that people tend to have two primary human needs, which is around certainty. I want to know what's going to
Yeah.
happen, and the second human need is around connection, because as I said, we've been in this 2D world for almost a year now.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are missing that 3D in real life connection.
Mm-hmm.
So it's acknowledging it, and creating experiences that are as close to 3D as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. And I think that one of the things that you talked about, in developing relationships, I think it's very easy for executives to get so caught up in their work that they neglect developing relationships. And that, like you said, intentional and who I should be developing relationships and dedicating time to that, and ensuring that those relationships, you're continuing to nurture them, and whatever you've got to do to build those with the right people. It's very easy for those leaders to lose that just completely sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's cool. That's cool. So developing relationships. So number three in your quick MBA.
So, number three. So, we've talked about, okay, you have to know your why, what's important to you, the self care piece. Then it's about the relationships. And the third, we've somewhat touched upon earlier in the hour, which was about being comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Ah,
So it's embracing that change, being okay with the discomfort. And it's really about reframing that. As I said, it's about, saying, okay, here's where the growth is. And there's somebody who I recently interviewed for my web show who said she has a 50% rule. She said, if I'm 50% uncomfortable, that's good for that
yeah,
role. That's how I know it's right for me. Why? Because that means I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow. It's going to challenge me.
yeah,
And you really don't necessarily always learn that in school. You're like, oh, you comfortable, you have to know. But what I've learned over time is I don't need to know everything. I can learn it, and to be continuously learning.
yes, yes.
And
That's very good. Is it just, and it is so true, is that, that uncomfortable nature of the things that we do, you think back to it. I mean, just about anything that you've done that's a big change or something new to you is uncomfortable in the beginning. And oftentimes it turns out very nicely.
yes. And you could turn back to various stages in your life, whether it was, going to a new school for the first
Mm-hmm.
time. We've all been to a new school at some
Yep.
point in our lives, or meeting new people at an event. It doesn't have to be this big thing. There are things that we do all the time, new foods that we try,
Yep.
right? A
Yeah.
book that we haven't read before, that's new.
It
A
is.
location that we haven't been to before, a restaurant we haven't tried, a museum. Like there's all these smaller changes that we have in our lives. And I think if we train ourselves, oh, this is a new experience and I'm going to learn something from it,
Mm-hmm.
and putting ourselves in a learning and growing mindset as opposed to, oh, I don't know what it is, I'm afraid. And I used this analogy recently with a client who is sort of white knuckling something. And I said, it just reminds me of the book. I don't know if you read it as a kid, called The Monster at the End of This Book. It had Grover. So Grover was the monster, and he was afraid of getting to the end of the book because he's like, there's a monster at the end of this book. And each page was filled with all these different things he tried to do so you wouldn't turn the page. He's like, oh no, you turned the page. And then the monster at the end of the book was him.
Oh. Yeah. I think I
And it's
remember
just
that one
us.
now. Yeah,
And
it
it's
is.
just us that
Yeah.
get in the way. So it's, what can you do now to reframe things so that it's more of, oh, I'm exploring something, and this exploration doesn't need to be scary. Yes, maybe it's uncomfortable and I have butterflies in my stomach, and those are good butterflies. That's
Yeah.
a signal. It's retraining your brain that the butterflies are actually a signal that you're growing.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. It's just a signal that you're growing. And I don't know when it was last week or something, I saw that old thing again about it's how people use failures, and it's someone building a wall with the bricks of failure and someone else building a stepping stone, where they're going up to success, and the other person built a wall of bricks that cornered them in the two, and it's just the one used it to propel themselves forward and the other one obviously cornered themselves in to stifle what they could do, and that's exactly what learning to be uncomfortable, I think, to help you grow is a good example of it, for sure.
And I think the way you exercise a muscle like that to embrace learning and change is to do something a little bit uncomfortable every day. And maybe that's an email. Maybe that's you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn that you're not sure if they're going to accept your invite. But if you never send it, then 100% they will never accept your invite.
Yes.
But if you send it, you got a 50-50 shot.
Yes. That's for sure. Doing something uncomfortable every day. Yes. So when you come back and you're the business strategist, chief of staff,
Yes.
what are you typically going to be helping? Are you helping an individual? Are you helping teams? How does it usually work?
Yes and yes. So it usually starts with somebody in the C-suite at the executive ranks who will say something like, we're trying to get these key strategic initiatives done, and we can't get to them. We don't have the bandwidth. We need some support in making sure that these things happen. And so can you come in and help us? So that's typically what happens for more rapidly growing company. Maybe they're 3 to 5 years old and they're going from what I'll call the infancy stage to the adolescent stage. And now they need some more structure because it's no longer a handful of people. There are more people involved, and they want to grow up and they want to be mindful of, okay, what are our key goals? How are we going to measure them? What are the longer term vision things that we need to be mindful of? And what are the actions that we need to take today in order to get there in the future? And somebody to sort of champion that, to remind them of that's what's happening. And then when some operational issues come along, making sure that they're communicated in a way that you can make decisions and action on them, not like, oh, this doesn't work. Great. What's the data? What are our options? You know, and so it's more formalizing some of the things that might have been easier when it was 5 people in a company, but now that the company is growing, they need to have more of a structure in place. So that's on the growing side. I also get involved with more established companies. So they might come and say, you know, Susan, as a result of the pandemic, we need to look at some different revenue streams, as an example, and just mapping out, well, how do you do that? But even before you get to, okay, these revenue streams, and that could be a strategy, you have to pull back the camera and say, what's the bigger picture here? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, why don't you just fold up now? Like, what is it that is so important to you? Because that has to be the driver, because there'll be, like I said, there'll be days when things aren't going so well and you want to retreat, and you have to remind yourself, what am I doing again? Oh, we have this bigger vision, and what we do today is going to impact that bigger vision later on.
Yeah.
So that's how it works. Usually there's a situation where the C-suite will say, you know, we're stuck in getting to that next level of growth and not sure what's getting in the way. And typically there's some aspect of a human roadblock, generally a mindset, you know, roadblock. And so to dig into that, and based on my background, early on in my career as a commercial lender, I come at things like knowing the context, like, so understanding, okay, what's going on in the overall economy, what's going on in their industry, what's going on in that company, how does that company compare to its peers, and then digging into, like, when an opportunity is just an opportunity in the company, what are all the different steps and stages does that opportunity go through until it generates revenue? Because it's that kind of, I'll call it a 360 view, where you get insight into what's really happening, what's getting in the way. It's those details that reveal what's really happening.
Yeah. So when you talked about mindset, what are some of the things that you run into mindset problems when you're dealing with these things?
So I think mindset issues play out in a few different ways. One set of mindset issues is saying, well, I'm the CEO and I'm the founder, so I'm the only one who can do it. I'm the only one that knows how. Nobody else can. It is going to take too much time to train somebody else, or the talent doesn't exist. So it's going from a founder mindset to a more of a business mindset, because if you're going to scale, the tools, processes, approaches that you might have used to get to your initial level of growth aren't necessarily going to be the same for that next level of growth. There are new tools and approaches. Just like if you're climbing a mountain, you need some different tools at different stages in the mountain. You certainly need different tools when you're going down the mountain than when you're going up the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's recognizing that, and you know, that takes some time too, and readiness for hearing that message.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're not dealing with somebody that's used to being told what they need to do. I mean, in what you do, a lot of it, you know, because if you're dealing with CEOs, I mean, they're used to being the ones that looks into the mirror and makes the decision.
So it's really about a collaboration when working with the CEO, right? Because I'm not going to pretend to know everything about their
Yes,
business,
yes,
because I
yeah,
don't. I'm not the subject
yes.
matter expert. But when I come in, it's about being a collaborative change agent and hearing, what are you trying to achieve, and understanding what's getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And often I find it's some sort of communication issue. 80% of the time, there's a
Really?
communication issue. Yeah.
Wow. Communication comes back to that again. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of stuff. I mean, you look in personal, professional, whatever. It's yeah, thinking that the other person really understands what you're saying, but they don't. Not receiving something right, not saying something right. It's just all kinds of things that affect that every single day. It's interesting how that weaves itself into so many things.
Absolutely. And I can give you an example from earlier in my career. I worked with a design build firm, and the CEO was telling me all these things that were wrong with his business. And he was convinced that the problem was marketing. So, how do you know the problem is marketing? Because sales are down. I said, and? He was like, what do you mean, and? I said, let's take a look at each stage of your business and let's figure this out. He said, okay, I'm game for that. So I go in and I found out a couple of things. One, in talking to the clients, what was happening is that CEO had strong opinions about how a remodeling of, let's say, their home should go down. So he had a vision. The client had a vision too. Sometimes those visions didn't meet, but ultimately it was the client's vision that really mattered because it was their home,
Exactly.
right? So when the client's vision didn't always meet the CEO's vision and things were built to that CEO's vision, he didn't receive full price. His
Mm-hmm.
client said, but you didn't, it's beautiful, but it's not built for me.
It's not what I wanted.
It's not what I wanted. And so that goes back to, you asked me about psychology in the beginning. That's active listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was being headstrong and not listening to the client and building to what the client wanted. Now, there could have been issues along the way. Maybe there's something structurally that they could say, well, we can't quite do it this way or that way. And obviously then there's modifications. But most of the time it was, no, there was one vision and another vision. The two didn't meet. So that was one issue. And then another issue had to do with control. And as part of this particular CEO's high need for control and information, he sometimes would overstep the super on the job and talk directly to the client. So now the client gets confused because they're like, am I talking to the CEO? Am I talking to the super? Who am I speaking with? And it doesn't seem like the super and the CEO are talking. So I'm not sure what's happening. And so in that case, to A, shine a light on that, and B, put in place a few different things. One, role descriptions, and socialize those role descriptions with everyone in the company so everybody knew what they were responsible for and when they had to be informed and who was involved in the decisions, but who was ultimately responsible for what. And then put in place some spreadsheets to give transparency into what was happening on a job and what was the status and what things were open and what were the issues. So it became transparent and gave that CEO the control that he was seeking. But that was far from marketing, had nothing to do with marketing.
Yes, exactly. It's a great example because it's oftentimes we think it's something else. Then it
Yes,
really, you get to the root cause, it's much different.
absolutely.
So you're really helping them figure out things and then make sure they're doing the things that they need to prevent that problem.
Yes, or when they run into a roadblock, to not run from it, but to really look into it and,
Mm-hmm.
and ask questions and get really curious. And that's another trick. Sometimes people jump to conclusions about things, and I ask people to jump into questioning, but not accusatory questioning, but curiosity questioning.
Mm-hmm. To try to just figure things out and get more details to get a more well-rounded view of the situation.
Yes.
Ah, very good. Very good. So you mentioned one thing a little bit back about these businesses as a founder goes, founder, they started out, there's 6 people in a room and they, business explodes and everything's great. And they look around and it's a year later and now there's 25 people in the room. I mean, that's something that a lot of business people never contemplate or don't consciously think about, I believe, because the way that you're structured, the systems you use, everything, every so often kind of has to morph. Not kind
Yeah.
of, it has to morph. It has to morph because you cannot any longer, when you go from one person that you're supervising to that room of, or even 4 or 5, because you can do that. When you look at that same room and it's 25 and they all look to you as a supervisor, that's not effective anymore. And oftentimes business people go right by that and wonder why their business is being limited, but it's them.
Yes, it's about letting go too.
Yeah.
It's surrounding yourself with a team of people, right? With your support staff, and trusting them to really do the work that they need to do, and to value their opinions, their thoughts, their feedback. And I think that's really when the magic happens, when you allow that runway for people to be their authentic selves, instead of one person just dictating what needs to get done. I think that becomes the magic sauce for
Yeah.
a company.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. And it's hard. I mean, I came up as a technician and then into a managerial and leadership roles. And it's that first transition is hard because you've got a way that you do things and it's driven your success too, a lot of times, right? So
Yes.
it's successful. And then when somebody else comes in and they want to do it a little differently or whatever, it as a leader, manager, whatever, you really need to back off a little bit and make sure that the end result is there with maybe the same efficiency and other things like that. But if the end result is there, you got to let it go. I mean, you got to let it go because otherwise you're not going to allow them to really flourish as they should, nor will you.
Yes. And going back to what we were talking about before about failures, also making it okay to fail. And that's a learning experience. And I say that to my daughters all the time. If they think they didn't do so well on a particular test or project, I'll say, did you learn and what from the experience, and what did you learn from that experience? Because I'm more interested in that learning journey for you.
Yeah.
And just change it up so that they would even feel comfortable to even share that with me. And that's the same thing with your team, making it okay to make a mistake. So I think when people are in an environment where they're so afraid of their jobs and like they have to do everything perfectly, it just creates such anxiety and angst. I mean, just talking about it, I get
Oh
to.
yeah, yeah. It just makes you just you just because there are places like that where people are
Yes.
so afraid to make a mistake, and then B, as soon as it happens, it's everybody, the CYA kicks in, and it's just it's so unproductive. And I think that when you're taking calculated risks, making mistakes are all calculated risks. I think in my understanding of it and the way that I look at it, because if you're going to do something and the risk is low, make a mistake at it, because who cares at that point? If you're going to try something and it's going to make it really a lot better, and you make a mistake, if it's a calculated risk and it's not a big loss, there's a lot more to gain out of the times that you win than off the few times that you're going to lose, because you're not going to do something knowing you're going to fail or it's not going to work. You're going to try something that you think might work. And if your people around you and your team is good, just good, they don't have to be great, all of them together thinking, and they agree that, yeah, let's take this calculated risk, you probably got a good shot that it's going to work out. And even if it's calculated and it's not a huge loss, if you do, go for it, because you'll learn something in the process and the next step will be better.
And that's really where innovation happens. Think about 3M and Post-it notes. Post-it notes were a mistake. That was the mistake that happened.
Exactly. And I had a role many years ago where I told people I had the BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals. And I love them. I think it's why it wakes me up in the morning. Right. And I told people, as we made a product, and it was a product that took about 8 weeks to make. And that was the standard in the industry. And I said, well, I think we should figure out how to do it in 2. And everybody got a blank look in their face. Why would you ever want to do that? I said, because you have to be super efficient to do that. B, you can't make mistakes. There's no room for quality errors. And C, we will kill the market. We will take over the market because everybody else is still living back here and we're way up here. And when we did it, it worked. And 2 years later, and a lot of trials and tribulations, but those kind of things is where the innovation happens, is by taking those risks and laying those things out, and then letting the talented people do the work, encouraging them through the failures. I think is part of that, which is, like you said, it's where the magic happens. So much fun. So, well, Susan, it's been awesome talking to you about this. What haven't I asked you that I should ask you?
So that's a great question. I think, in summary, I would like to say this is my approach to things. I call it CPAS. So the C stands for clarity. So to get really clear on what's important to you, your goals, going back to our earlier part of our conversation. The P is for permission, and that's permission to put yourself on your agenda. And if you struggle with that one, I always say, blame me, blame Susan Ganz. A is about having access to experts and to others who can support you in your goals. So having a forum like this to be able to discuss these issues is all part of your access. And the first S is for having a secure foundation for all aspects of your life as part of the self-care that we talked about in terms of your personal life, your financial life, and your professional life. And the final S in that process and approach is for support, and making it okay for yourself to reach out for support, because we don't all have the answers. And it's great to be able to bounce ideas off of peers, to have a community like the Exit Your Way community and the Faces of Business, to be able to discuss various business issues and other issues relative to your life. Yeah. And it's really about taking control. As I'll repeat what I said, you are the CEO of your life.
That is for sure. Those are great points, because they just are. There's great points. That's awesome, Susan. Thank you. That in summary is wonderful. So thank you so much for being here today, Susan. And I'm just delighted that we had the opportunity to talk like this and to learn from you and learn how you're helping people. And if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So there's a few ways. You can reach me on my website, GanzStrategicSolutions.com. So that's GANZ, Strategic Solutions with an S at the end.com. Here on LinkedIn, you can get me at Susan Ganz of Ganz Strategic Solutions, or you can email me directly at susan@GanzStrategicSolutions.com.
Awesome, awesome, and we'll put that in the details of the post and of the YouTube video as well. If people are listening to that, well, again, with me today on the Faces of Business, I realize I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of the thing, but I'm Damon Pistolka. But I've got a wonderful guest with me today, and Susan Ganz, and we've been talking about how she helps people as a business strategist and a chief of staff, and talking about her background. I'm just so appreciative of you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Damon. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Awesome. Well, if anyone wants to listen to this again, we'll have it here. You can come to us live on LinkedIn. It'll soon be on our website, on our blog page. And right now we are also on Spotify and other podcasting channels. So thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Susan. We'll be back here on Thursday. We've got Bonnie Sussman-Strominger talking to us about building a brand with video. And if you haven't seen her talk before and the things that she does with video, it's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll talk with you soon.